We're here, finally beginning an
I've just
era.
been itching for
The
this.
most
I'm
uh
excited.
the most normal, boring, not quality, bouncing up and down era of all of Doctor Who.
Mhm.
This is
It's
true.
also my favorite series.
Series 5 is my favorite as well. It's also the series I first started watching. Matt Smith was my first Doctor.
My sixth favorite series, so I'm not like as high on it as other people.
Yeah.
It's good though. It's good.
Always got to be a contrarian.
Yeah, that's my job.
It's a shame that Lucy could not be here. For her own personal reasons, we're not
Yes.
going to Shanghai her into this.
Oh
Honestly,
yeah, definitely.
bit of a blessing and a curse because it means less editing for me. It wasn't our intention to have such a massive break between when we recorded the end of time video and this, but it's kind of fitting.
I told you we wouldn't get past the end of time until the real life end of time happened.
I suppose we'll just do our regular thing where we go around and get everyone's thoughts on the episode. So, starting from Brian.
Well, I mean, like, what can I say that hasn't been covered by like every single reviewer on the planet? Because like this is such a well-known episode. Like I didn't even watch it in preparation because I remember every single moment of it. Like it introduces a lot of really important concepts, obviously for the 11th Doctor, but also just like a lot of actors that are going to be incredibly important for the rest of the next like 3 seasons. So it was a very, very good episode for me. And it was all the little parts, I think, moving together that really made me like it. I liked the 11th Doctor's characterization. It lent itself really well to his initial appearance at the end of time. That's where it ends. And they built his kind of sort of quirky personality without it being super obnoxious. It's a little obnoxious, but not super obnoxious. I really enjoyed the Prisoner Zero. I love like villains that use camouflage, so it's always really unsettling for me. One of my favorite boss fights in the history of video games is the octopus fight from Metal Gear Solid 4, which is very similar. Like something is slightly off in the surrounding area, and you won't notice until you look really hard. I like the fact that the enemy was beaten without actually having to fight them. I like the scene where Luther from the Umbrella Academy shows up for 5 minutes, and I like the scene where they've got the 10 doctors kind of previous to him in order, and then his face kind of goes through David Tennant's, and it's a little on the nose, but they earned it, I think. And at this point, him just showing up and terrifying the enemy into an action hadn't gotten old yet, so it was a really effective way of kind of ending the episode. I loved Rory, obviously. I think everybody loves Rory. Loved Amy, both versions of her. Just all around one of my favorite episodes of Doctor Who, and one of the first ones I ever watched in addition to that. So it's got a special place in my heart.
You're like tripping me out right now because I did rewatch this episode and I've rewatched it a lot in the past couple years. Never occurred to me that was Luther from Umbrella Academy.
Right? He just kind of pops in there and you're like, wait a second, I know you.
By the standards of series openers, which tend to be a bit light, not really going for the jugular unless it was like I think series 6 and 9 and stuff. This one is real. It's better than I think most of the new Doctor stories. Which what this one does is that's better than a lot of the other new Doctor stories. Right from the get-go, they get through a lot of the awkward post-regeneration stuff in a pretty fun way, with the whole scene where he's testing out food. It's a really funny scene, well written, and it also helps to like get over a lot of the usual regeneration jitters, which I usually think are generally a bit awkward in other episodes, but this one manages it well. And they also managed to pair it as well with the plot of the world ending in 20 minutes, which gives the episode a lot of tension. And they also managed to fit in a lot of scenes where he's sort of discovering his new personality, what this Doctor is like, and it fits in really well. Even the scene where he gets the costume doesn't feel like shoehorned in there. It feels like really natural. So it's a really well paced episode, and it helps Matt Smith's Doctor establish himself over the course of the episode, culminating in the scene where he sends the Atraxi off, which immediately establishes him as a lot more of a I'd say kind of sinister and more domineering version of the Doctor than David Tennant, who was all bombast a lot of the time, whereas Matt Smith's Doctor, what he does. What Moffat does is he immediately establishes this Doctor is someone with a reputation who uses his reputation against people in a similar way he wrote in Forest of the Dead. So that was good. And all in all, I think it's a really good introduction to Amy as well. The whole thing of the Doctor meeting her when she's a child, then abandoning her, accidentally coming back 12 years later. It's very similar to The Girl in the Fireplace, but handled very differently, and it's a really clever way to introduce Amy and immediately establishes an interesting, new, fresh dynamic between a Doctor and companion. So that's good. Overall, it's a really solid start for Smith's Doctor. I think he's very impressive here. He comes across different enough from David Tennant, and honestly, from his first scene, he just feels like so natural in the role, which was a surprise. A lot of people at the time, I remember, were very unsure if he was the right choice, but I think he manages to get across a lot of the comedy as well as a lot of the more darker moments. It's a strong start, and I think if I was to say anything negative, as usual with series openers, I think the story isn't the most interesting. I will say the Prisoner Zero, the Atraxi are just really boring villains. I wasn't really interested whenever they were on screen personally. So it's still, I don't think it's like this fantastic episode that other people say it is, but out of the new Doctor, all the new Doctor stories, it's the best one, I'd say. I just think it's the best executed out of all the new Doctor stories. There's no time being wasted. It feels fresh. I think it feels really different from the previous era immediately. And I think it's a very strong start for the Doctor and Amy. Rory, I think only really starts getting good in Amy's Choice. Here, he just feels like kind of discount Mickey. He feels the same way in Vampires of Venice. But otherwise, it's a strong start. I actually wish as well we got to see more of Ledworth. Because I did like the characters they introduced here as well. And I remember watching this first time when it aired, thinking those characters would come back, but they never did, and I don't know what the reason for that is. Just I think probably a sign that Moffat was, I think, more. He generally tends to be a lot less focused on family stuff and stuff like that, and like sort of the homes of the companions. So that's probably a big reason why, but I would have liked to see them come back. It was a nice sort of setting for this episode, and it worked pretty well.
I really liked this. I liked it a lot. It's definitely one of the stronger, newer Doctor stories. I think, like I said, Smith hits it out of the park. I know they filmed a few episodes before he did this one, so he had already kind of figured the character out, but like he just kind of gets off the ground running, and it does a lot to establish where this is it's very consciously trying to show that this is new and this is big and this is bombastic and already showing off the kind of new effects and stuff. Sometimes to the detriment. One complaint I really have is that I wish they hadn't had the opening of him hanging out of the TARDIS and stuff like that, showing the London skyline. It did seem like they were just trying to show off the new kind of HD, because like the show started shooting in HD, but they hadn't really designed the show around that. They were still in Davis's era. This was Planet of the Dead, but I think they just wanted to show off how everything looked in high def, and they're fitting for that. But that's my main thing, is that I really love the opening so much. I think we should just focused on young Amy and kind of went there. No, I think Amy's a really well established character. I like the mystery surrounding her and the crack. It's something that Moffat will revisit, but I think it's a lot more naturally handled here, because Amy is her own character, and the crack doesn't overtake her entire arc of a character and establishing a relationship with the Doctor and her kind of even straight off from her emotional dependency on it and the fact that he was such a fixture for her when she was a child. And Karen Gillan's great as well. I agree that Rory is not that great here. I gotta say, I gotta put this down to how charismatic Arthur Darvill is, because a lot of the dialogue he gets, it makes him extremely irritating in a lot of parts. But because Arthur Darvill handles it so gracefully, it doesn't come across as annoying to me. Also, one thing I noticed in my rewatch, nearly the entire episode, because of the time limit, nearly takes place in real time, and the Doctor's just constantly moving. He's constantly active. He's constantly kind of toing and froing, and you don't really notice him until you sit down. It's like, oh wait, he just doesn't really, outside of the food scene at the beginning, he doesn't really stop. And I think that's a great way to show him a lot more manic and where like as Rob said, Tennant is bombastic, whereas Smith comes across as more manic and energized and just kind of running around the place and kind of making he comes across like he's making stuff up as he goes along, but he has everything planned out ahead of time. I also like the fact that there's a tradition of some doctors stealing their outfit from hospitals. The Third Doctor and the Eighth Doctor did as well. So I like them. I liked like the same way with Jodie Whittaker getting her costume in the charity shop. I like when doctors don't just get this from the TARDIS wardrobe. They find odd ways of getting their costume. I really liked the Atraxi. I liked the Prisoner Zero. The whole perception thing, as Brian said, Moffat loves his little perception-y kind of things where they trick with the viewer's mind and stuff like that. And this is before it became overkill. And we again, there's a lot of stuff established about this. We get references to the silence, which I'm sure they'll come up in more interesting ways later. And just a lot of intrigue and a lot of motifs that keep coming up over and over again. They even reference the they make a browser history joke, which comes up later in the Capaldi era. So, a lot of establishing going on with future events. Like I said, I don't have a hell of a lot of complaints. Like I said, I think Rory is better handled in later stuff. I agree. I did wish the Ledward cast did come back. The one thing I will say, there's that scene where, and it felt very Sherlock-y, where he's remembering things from the mobile phones and using them for pictures. The camera effects of it going up, it's very early 2010s and it's really cringy now. It has not aged very well. They handle that editing stuff better in Sherlock. But yeah, no, there's a lot of this really, really holds up. I love, like I said, the slow erosion of the RTD era, like with his old sonic screwdriver breaking and stuff like that. It's a great kind of establishment of the new normal. And of course, Smith just hits it over the park straight away. Like, I love his speech, the iconic speech on the roof, and him going into Tennant's face, because there was a lot of worries because of how big Tennant was in the role, of how he would do that. And I like that establishment of him going through the face. It's a great statement of, here's the new guy, love him or hate him, and he just kind of takes it and runs with it. And yeah, no, it's mostly set up, but I think it's really well told and it's really well paced. And there's a lot of great elements in the script. So yeah, one of the best, definitely one of the best new Doctor episodes. They don't tend to be amazing, in fairness. They're more focused on establishing, but it tells a really fast plot and gets everything set up really effectively, regardless of how it ends up paying off. But that's going to be for future reference.
I love this episode so much. It like was said before, I just kind of agree with all the good that was put. I disagree with the idea of like him holding on to the TARDIS being like unnecessary, because I love immediate manic energy. This is the episode that when people ask where to start with Doctor Who, I tell them to watch. Although having rewatched what is it, series 10?
Yeah, series 10.
Yeah, that's also a good place now. But like I always say, you start with 11 and then go back to 9 and watch from there, because it's just such a good explanation of the show and who the character is, especially because you get to see him interact with a kid. which is a point we'll probably get into later.
That will definitely come up, yes.
Yeah.
You know what I've noticed as well? A lot of people actually tend to be put off by Rose. I've noticed, like, I don't know why, but a lot of people I think that I've seen talk about the show say that they found Rose way too silly to continue because they didn't really buy the autons, and they thought it was just really silly, especially with the plastic, the wheelie bin thing. So
Okay.
Rose, I've noticed, is not like, doesn't seem to be like the best first episode.
Yeah, no, I always
So I think you got a point.
I like Brian said, I feel like I could just quote this entire episode from back to front. I adore the moment where he's talking to the Atraxi on top of the building and like establishes himself as the Doctor immediately. I love that that's the first episode, because some Doctors will have that moment in maybe their second or third or fourth episode, and 11 just gets to it immediately, which like Matt Smith got a lot of flack, I'd say second only to Jodie Whittaker, just for being the youngest at the time to ever play the Doctor. People just really didn't like him for some reason. Probably because they didn't know him at all. He was just this weird 25-year-old dude. Yeah, I feel Rory could have been done better, but I don't know. I feel like all the points everybody just kind of hit already. I love young Amelia. I love the creepiness and the establishment of the crack. I love all of it. I love this episode so much. I guess if I had to think of one more original complaint that could be a little more colored, like some of the scenes, particularly when you go, I think it's just because they were shooting on cloudy days, honestly.
I don't know what you're talking
It
about.
just seemed a little gray, but besides that, no, it's almost perfect in my opinion.
I just want to say as well, it was such a great find to get. It was Karen Blackwood, I think. I think they didn't know that her and Karen. No, I can't remember. Caitlin Blackwood, like the young actress's name.
Oh yeah, they were cousins.
Yes, they didn't actually know it until after the shooting, apparently.
Until after that, yeah, I forgot.
Yeah, but like,
Just
it was just like incredible. It was just inspired, like, because they look so alike.
Yeah.
And like, and that they didn't know they were related beforehand. It was such a great find because so rarely do you get like a younger actor playing an older actor that spot on in terms of you could totally believe her growing on to be Karen Gillan, and then I found out they actually were.
Just speaks to the strength of the casting directors that they managed, because they were looking for parts for both of them, and they just happened to pick the two people that were A, both suited for the role, and B, were related in general.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff is genetic, right?
So this episode doesn't really have that much significance for me. I was talking to Nick about this last night. I feel like it's a good episode. It establishes a lot of important points that Nick pointed out and that the rest of you pointed out. For me, it runs a little bit. I don't want to say boring, but it's a little bit bland for me. I feel like the issue that we face is kind of a non-issue for the Doctor. Like there's really no tension for me when I watch it. I think honestly, I don't have that much to say about this episode. I like it and I recognize its importance and its significance, but it's not one of my favorites. Although, of course, I'm always glad to see 11.
And just for context, you also didn't rewatch it with us when we did the rewatch.
I did not. I didn't have to because, like most of us, I remember most of it, but I did not rewatch it with the rest of you guys.
Eden's right. This remains, all these years later, my go-to episode to introduce people to the show with. And, like, after my Series 10 rewatch, the pilot has kind of also taken up that spot. But a lot of points that I was going to discuss have been covered. I have kind of... There's a lot of things that have come up that I have feelings about. Like, one of them, I guess, since it's the very beginning, I do side more with Dan than I do with Eden in regards to I don't think we needed to open with the Doctor in the TARDIS hanging off there. Like, I understand why it's there. Like, I get it. This episode isn't... 11th Hour isn't doing quite the same thing that previous jumping on points for the show were doing. And I think compare this to other episodes that I would do that with, like Rose and Smith and Jones. In those episodes, Rose and Martha are very clearly the protagonist and the audience POV characters. This episode isn't really doing that. The Doctor is firmly the audience viewpoint character for this story, so it makes sense from a narrative structure standpoint that our first scene is where we left him. But I really think it would have been to this episode's benefit to open with Amelia on her bed, and then suddenly the Doctor crashes into her life and the audience learns about him as she does. Like, this even extends to the fact that I don't like that we see the inside of the TARDIS before Amy sees it. And if this is your first Doctor Who story, the first thing you see is the burning remains of a previous visual like thing from the last era, and that feels weird. It's the one thing that's like, it kind of makes me second guess the choice to do this for a newcomer. And it sounds weird to say that because it's such a brief, inconsequential like opening thing. And if it is your first episode, it does still have the intrigue of like, what's going on? Who's this guy? Why is this ship crashing? But I'd have preferred it if we saw nothing of the TARDIS, if we had no clue what was going on until that moment at the end where we open the doors and it's brand new.
I think my bigger thing as well is that I think the conversation with Amelia and the Doctor just is so perfect that it would be a perfect opener. That, you know, as soon as he crashes in and they have the conversation and Amelia Pond is like a fairy tale, it just sets the tone for Matt's era so perfectly straight on that if that's your first impression of as the series going on, I think it makes a bit more impact. It's not a huge deal because it's a very short opening anyway, but I just think how good that scene with the two of them in the kitchen is, and it just works a lot better than how the episode is structured now. And there's one thing I will say that the Woman Who Fell to Earth does really well is like you said, like Rose and Spittin' Jones not having the Doctor in it for so long, because we get that establishment of this new cast and they feel more of a focal point. I think that's the one thing that the One Fell to Earth has over this one, which would be another one of my go-to for decent introductory episodes for the Doctor. Sorry, I'll let you go on.
No, don't worry about it. I do feel like I'm a bit more forgiving of some of the other stuff that's been criticized a bit. Like, I agree that the Atraxi and Prisoner Zero are like not really compelling as far as villains go, but they don't really have to be, because this is, again, because the focus is so much on establishing the Doctor and Amy and that dynamic. The fact that they're just there to be the external threat, there's honestly more thought put into them than could have been. Compare this to the Sycorax from Christmas Invasion, where they really are really just kind of boring and unremarkable. Like, they are a warfaring alien invasion here to take over the Earth. And like they mind control people by using their blood, which is kind of interesting, but there's nothing really about them that's interesting. I think the idea of Prisoner Zero is cool. Like, I really like the concept of the multiform, like this thing that can disguise itself specifically by being one thing that pretends to be multiple things. Like, I think that's fun. And the fact that the Atraxi are going to blow up the planet, not because there's anything that Earth did or that they care at all, but because there's a prisoner here, and it's like a bad guy hiding out in like a used abandoned shack or something. They're just going to blow it up with dynamite, basically. And yeah, I think Moffat, in his episodes under Russell and continually throughout his own era, will prove to be a really cool idea guy, and that will be almost to his detriment, where he'll blow what I think are really interesting ideas in just like 5-minute scenes in an episode. But stuff like that I think is really fun, which is, okay, the bad guys are not really interesting characters at all, but we can make them an interesting concept. And the other thing I will vouch for in this episode is Rory, because I think he's meant to be lame and unremarkable on purpose.
My man.
With that.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that doesn't make
He's
sense.
our dope.
But that's true.
It's just because, again, the POV character here is the Doctor, and to a lesser extent Amy, And so much of what will eventually become the conflict between the three of them is that neither of them take Rory all that seriously initially. Neither of them really take his feelings into account. Neither of them think that he's very interesting or heroic, or like he's not on the same level as them. And this, I think, achieves it better than what we did with Mickey back in series one, where Mickey's characterization was kind of all over the place, but he never seemed like a bad guy. And when other characters or the narrative of the episode would kind of take a dump on him, it didn't feel earned and it would kind of rub you the wrong way. Here it's like, Rory, again, he's not a bad guy, but you totally get why Amy and the Doctor especially would be super dismissive of him, because we as viewers are kind of dismissive of him initially, and we kind of come around on him as the other two come around on him. So I think it's very, I like that as a choice.
Oh, actually, that's you're kind of making me come around to it a little bit. I did find some of his dialogue to be a bit on the grating side. Like I said, it's played well, so it doesn't bother me too much. But that whole idea, because a lot of Amy's arc for her entire character revolves around her relationship with Rory and her making that choice between chasing after her childhood fantasy made manifest or settling to a life with Rory. And I mean, you could read into more problematic kind of aspects to that, and a woman to choosing between a man and blah, blah, blah. But we'll get there when we get there. my point being, like you said, it does establish, I didn't consider it that like he's deliberately meant to be unremarkable and kind of a doofus as an audience way of underestimating him until he proves himself later on. So no, you're making me come around to the characterization a bit. That was a good point. I didn't read. Also, I forgot to mention this when I was going through my own points. Screw them entirely for wasting Olivia Colman like that. Like, what the hell?
Stephen Moffat said that was his biggest regret from his whole era.
I think she's too high profile to be a doctor now, but you gotta bring her back sometime for guest spot or something.
I think this episode reflects that Moffat has his tropes that have really been around since he started writing for the show, like way back from The Empty Child. And some of them are really interesting to think, like they're all interesting to think about, but some of them, no matter how many times he does it, still prove to be like, it's him iterating on an idea, and that's interesting, versus some other things which are just him repeating tropes and just putting things in episodes that he seems to like to do. And like, I'm going to expand, especially once we get to the Beast Below, one of those things is his propensity for putting children in these stories and making them about children and childhood and the Doctor's relationship to that. Eric Rodriguez, the Blockbuster Buster, way back when he did his Doctor Who retrospective, mentioned not really liking Amy as a character in Series 5, and I feel like a lot of people had that. But rewatching starting from here, I think it's really clear that like she's meant to be flighty in the sense that she has arrested development. And I think it's easy to forget this line because we don't do a lot with it. But as soon as you hear the fact that she's had multiple psychiatrists who like dropped her because she kept biting them, and it's like the episode kind of plays it off like a joke, but we're immediately saying that Amy has literally, in almost every sense of the word, not grown up as a person. She's not a functioning adult woman. She is a girl in a woman's body, and that's because of this encounter with the Doctor. And what does that mean for him, and what does it mean for her? And that, I think, is something that is just really interesting, and it feeds into this idea that Moffat has about the Doctor as a character and Doctor Who as a show meant primarily for children. And it's going to be a consistent thing in Moffat's era. And one of the few things that, like, coming into this show with the Moffat era makes it feel weird to look at anything else, where it's like, no other showrunner did this. Davies doesn't do it. Chibnall doesn't do it. The classic show didn't do it. Moffat is the only run of the show where children have really a significant role in stories at all, let alone so consistently.
It's interesting because, like, yeah, he mentions children right up in, like, the final speech he writes for Capaldi. Like
Mhm.
they mention his attachment to children, and like you said, that's the one thing that pops up to me. Even in the classic era and other show head writers, he doesn't mention his attachment and defend and protectiveness towards children at all. And it feels more like I said, a meta thing where he's talking to the audience that the Doctor's there for them, and it's he's there to protect them. It's like I said, it's an interesting focal point. So because like Moffat could be accused of trying to make things too dark or adult and stuff like that, but like he always seems to have like the children watching the show in mind when he's crafting his stories and crafting his
Well, I
arcs
mean,
and narratives.
Matt's TARDIS kind of speaks to that too. Like if you see the first iteration of it, it's basically like a sort of kiddish playground.
As Nick said, that Amy seems like somebody with Arrested Development, and a consistent point brought up about Moffat is her like against him is her sexuality. As much as he could get away with that, again with children's show, like her being a kissogram, her coming on to the Doctor really really hard in a couple of episodes, stuff like that. But like I think when Nick points out that she has this kind of sense of arrested development, it seems like her overcompensating to try to be more of a grown up, more of an adult, and this is like this is like a child's idea of how a grown up should act, and you see that with child stars and stuff like that, where they overcompensate because they've had to act and they've been stuck in this mindset for so long.
I was actually going to bring this up when you were talking earlier, Nick. There's kind of a subtle aspect of that too, in the fact that like Amy doesn't have parents in this episode, and it's one of those things where like the way that they framed it, they could have introduced the parents in the next episode, and it just happened that they didn't wake up when like the Doctor came down. But I think it also speaks to like just Moffat specifically with this season, how tightly it was written, because there was a lot of situations like that where there are these elements that all tied into the finale, without spoiling obviously, but there were a lot of little tidbits that kind of informed the characters that were directly related to the Big Bang when we eventually get to that episode.
Yeah.
And this was really like a more subtle one that like I didn't even think of when I first watched the episode, because of course the parents aren't going to be awake at like 3 a.m, but the kid would be, like that kind of stuff. So you can kind of easily like nest it inside of like a regular setting for an episode.
Yeah.
It's like when Tom Baker said, like, being the Doctor makes you the imaginary friend to every kid who watched the show. And like William Hartnell had that too, because you would see him like playing with kids, like as the Doctor in character and pretending to run away from Daleks whenever like kids would come up for his autograph or something. And Stephen Moffat, particularly with 11, there's hints of it with 12, but like all through 11, that just is him. Like he is literally Amy's imaginary friend, but also just like so he is both childlike and like parental, I guess. I feel like I'm looking for a different word, but yeah, parental in like this really fun, youthful, energy filled way. And I know it really strikes me because you can trace it through, like not only with Amy or as we see the kids in The Beast Below, but if you keep going, there's those like little kids that Clara takes care of in her first episode, and like the girl in the Rings of Catan, yeah, like constant. He interacts with children, which like I think in some ways you could say that even though he's gone to say he based it off of 2, I think in some ways there's a lot of parallels between like 11 and 1 characterized in terms of just kind of being the Yoda figure, but also like too curious for their own good sometimes.
Some of the really, really early comics had like nephews and these really young kids, nephews and nieces they called them. They were weird. But yeah, no, that's completely the point. And actually, you reminded me of the fact that in the 50th anniversary, what really inspires him to try to save Gallifrey?
Children.
Won't somebody please think of
the children?
Another thing that I thought in terms of like Moffat iterating on ideas and like themes versus just using tropes again, just like his propensity for mystery boxes. And I feel like this show, because it's not just him. Russell was a big fan of making the series arc a mystery box. Chibnall did the same thing with Series 12. I feel like of any Doctor Who series, this one has the most effective mystery box in the form of the crack. And like we can talk about eventually, like later down the line when we get to it, how that is or isn't impacted by this series leading directly into 6 and 7. But I think the crack is really interesting. And it's just what makes it neat is that it's a mystery box that's not like, oh, can you guess who or what it is that's just off screen doing things? It's like, no, it's an interesting premise. And the idea is just finding out what the heck really is happening. Because immediately, like, your first episode, your introduction to this new status quo, and it's like, this crack isn't in the wall. If you knock down the wall, the crack will still be there. And it's like, okay, how does that work? What does that mean? Instantly, it's such a weird idea, and it's like, yeah, I'll follow several episodes to see what the heck that is. And I think so. Like as a mystery, that works fine. Although I do think Moffat does the thing that he again does too often, which is like bait the audience more than he has to, because just having that question there is fine on its own. And we what I think is really interesting and the preferred way I would have kept it is that at the end of the episode, we have the more subtle, interesting, meaningful tease for the arc of the season, which is when Amy is in the TARDIS and she says, "Why me? Like, why are you picking me for this?" And the doctor says it's because he's lonely. And Amy is like, "Oh, is that the only reason?" And he just says, "Yep, only reason." And right next to him on the monitor on the TARDIS display is the crack, and he just shuts it off. You can like take that a number of ways, because I think the way we're meant to take it is that the doctor wants Amy to come with him because he's intrigued by the crack and he assumes it relates to her, and he shuts off the display so she doesn't clue into that. And I like that because it's quick and it's not remotely intrusive, but if you're paying attention, it's also full of implications for this character, especially since it's kind of it's that kind of vaguely manipulative, secretive behavior that is something that 11 will repeat with Amy and then later Clara. So we set up this immediately unintentionally sinister side to 11. I think that works great. What we don't need is to have Prisoner Zero, who in the grand scheme of things is a nobody and will never show up in this show again, to be like, the silence will fall, the Pandorica will open. Like, who is Prisoner Zero that they know any of that or that means anything to them? They're nobody. This is just Moffat inserting a tease for the sake of a tease, and it feels really forced.
They do that with the Weeping Angels too in Flesh and Stone, where they say, literally just repeat the same line Prisoner Zero said.
Moffat tends to do that a lot, where he has like random characters to say cryptic things important to the plot, and then when you find out what they're talking about, there's no actual way for them to know what it is.
The worst example of it is Robot of Sherwood with the robots who for some reason want to go to paradise.
The problem is that Moffat can't ever give you a full secret once he reveals something. So with series 5 and 6 and 7, I can't remember, there was a video essayist that talked about this. It might have been Full Fat Videos or one of those guys. They were like, at the end of season 5, you're like, oh, what caused the cracks? You'll have to watch season 6 to find out more.
Farmer Guy's Sherlock video where he briefly talks about Moffat's whole approach to storytelling.
Yeah, exactly. So when you get these teases, when you're first watching, you're like, oh man, I'm in for it. But then when you know like what it's gonna lead to, you're just like, why didn't he just give us more information? Because then he's kind of got he kind of ends up, because of external factors with Matt Smith, having to kind of cram all of the reveals into like the last episode. And it was
Madame Kavarian went back in time and blew up the TARDIS. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was just like that kind of stuff, the silence, all that.
Yeah, people say like, oh, he never really explained it. He never really explained it. He goes, no, he did explain it. It just wasn't a very good answer, and it's very boring compared to what he was trying to build up. No other story arc before this had really built, like, Russell T Davies did build towards episodes, but not in a way where you're getting drip fed more information about the mystery. Just kind of stuff happened and it pays off later on. Whereas this, you're getting hints that moves towards a grander, big reveal. He tried to do that in series 6. It's not as effective, and then he just kind of gives up on it. But it's the one, and that was the one thing. It is one of the few times where I'm like, oh, this actually is a story. You are telling me a story with a build-up and a progression. So I'm into this. I really like this. And I will say it is admirable that he did try to do a multi-series arc. It didn't work, but it's admirable. Chibnall's trying.
I feel like my favorite arcs for this show have been this one and the one from the previous series, series 4, where that also felt like the missing planets are like impacting individual episodes. It feels like they're building to something. Those two things, it felt like Russell and Moffat for series 4 and 5, they had an idea for a story that they decided to present as a mystery. What if planets started going missing and that sort of like kept impacting the Doctor's adventures until he found out what was up? What if there was this crack that was erasing things and the Doctor had to, and it eventually led up to this thing where it's like, oh, this has been centered around the Doctor himself this whole time. And they decided to make that just an intriguing thing that they would dole out information slowly, as opposed to series 1 through 3 and series 6 through 10. And, well, 10 not so much, but like 6 through 9, I'll say, where it felt like they had an idea for a quote-unquote mysterious thing, and that was kind of it, where they would just sprinkle in references, and that would be the extent of the story. Here, it's like we've got a story that we're going to tell over multiple episodes, and it just so happens to be a thing where, like, can you, like, follow along? We're slowly letting you know what's up.
One thing I will say about the arc in this episode, I don't know if anyone else thought this, but on my first viewing, I didn't really assume the crack would come back. I just assumed the crack was related to Prisoner Zero.
See, I don't have what you guys have, because again, the moment that I described earlier, and I think a lot of people could miss it because it goes by so fast, but like Amy
That's
asked,
what happened with me, actually, I think.
Yeah,
First time I watched the episode, I didn't notice it. So
Amy asks, why am I here? The Doctor looks at the crack on the screen and is like, no reason. So yeah, that I think covers pretty much all the areas of interest. We're going to transition now to The Beast Below, so that's going to be its own video. Join us for that one. For now, though, thank you for listening, and leave your thoughts on this episode in the comments. And, any points we made, if you found it interesting or valid or whatever. Like, subscribe, that jazz.